The train was still moving when Elanor Shaw understood she had been lied to. She stood on the platform at Cheyenne with her trunk at her feet and a small photograph held tight in one gloved hand. The photograph showed a man of about 30, dark hair, a clean jaw, eyes that looked like they laughed easily. The man walking toward her down the platform was past 60, white hair under a worn hat, a cane in his right hand. Olympie was trying very hard to hide and failing. Elanor looked at the photograph. She looked at the man. She looked at the photograph again. It was the same face, 30 years older. The photograph she had been mailed, the photograph she had carried for 2,000 miles, the photograph she had fallen, little bit in love with on a dozen lonely nights was 20 years old. The man stopped a few feet from her. He took off his hat. His hands were not steady. He said, "Miss Shaw, I owe you an apology before you say anything at all." Elanor did not answer. She could not. Behind her, the train was loading for the return run east. It would leave in 5 minutes. She had enough money for a ticket back. She had a sister in Ohio who would take her in and never once say the thing they would both be thinking. 5 minutes. That was the window. Marry the stranger who had deceived her or turned around and go home and forget Wyoming ever happened. Here is what made it hard. The old man in front of her was not leering. He was not making excuses. He was standing there with his hat in his hands and his eyes wet, waiting to be rejected like a man who had already rehearsed the rejection 100 times and knew he deserved it. I have read a great many accounts of mail-order marriages on the frontier. Most of them begin with a lie. Very few of them begin with a liar apologizing before the bride can even speak. To understand the choice Elanor Shaw made in the next 5 minutes, you have to understand the two lives that collided on that platform. So let me stop the clock there with the train, loading and the old man waiting, and tell you how both of them arrived at it. Elanor Shaw was 34 years old, and in the language of 1888, that made her a problem. She had grown up in Dayton, Ohio, the eldest of 4 daughters in a family that had money until it didn't. Her father ran a printing business. When he died, the business died with him, and the debts he left behind ate the house, the furniture, and the small inheritance Elanor had been promised. Her 3 younger sisters married. Elanor did not. She had spent her best marrying years caring for her dying father, and by the time he was gone, the men her age in Dayton had already chosen wives 10 years younger. She was educated, capable, and quietly furious about a world that had decided her value expired at 30. She worked as a bookkeeper for a dry goods firm. The pay covered a rented room and very little else. She watched her sisters fill their homes with children.
ऐसी जिंदगी अच्छी है, दूर की यारी, दूर की दोस्ती, और वैसे भी मैं अय्याशी भी ना मुफ्त की नहीं करता हूँ.
She went back to her room each night and read by a single candle to save on lamp oil. The advertisement appeared in a matrimonial paper that her landlady left on the parlor table. A Wyoming rancher, it said, of good character and established property, sought a wife of mature years and steady temperament. Mature years. Elanor read those 2 words and felt something she had not felt in a long time, which was wanted, she wrote. He wrote back. The letters were good. They were warm and plain and honest about hard work and Wyoming winters. And they never once flattered her in the cheap way the few Dayton suitors had. The man who wrote them, who signed himself Josiah Pratt, seemed kind. He sent a photograph, a handsome man of 30 with laughing eyes. Elanor accepted his proposal by mail. She sold what little she owned. She bought a one-way ticket to Cheyenne and told her sisters she had found a good man with a good ranch. And she believed it because she needed to believe it. The frontier ran on exactly this kind of faith. Women crossed the country to marry men they had never met, carrying photographs and letters and hope, because the arithmetic of their lives back home offered them nothing better. The homesteader Elanor Pruitt Stewart, who built a life on the Wyoming range in those same years, wrote plainly in her letters that any woman who could stand the loneliness would do better on the land than slaving for wages in a city. Elanor had read words like that. She had decided to believe them. So, when she stood on that platform and saw that the man was 60 and not 30, the lie did not just insult her. It threatened the entire fragile bargain she had made with her own future. She had bet everything on the man in the photograph, and the man in the photograph did not exist anymore. Josiah Pratt was 61 years old, and he had not meant to lie. That is the part most people get wrong about him. He had come to Wyoming in 1849, a young man chasing the same dream everyone chased. He had not gone to California for gold. He had stopped in the Laramie Valley, looked at the grass, and understood that grass was a slower gold and a surer one. He built a ranch out of nothing. He married a woman named Sarah in 1855. They had 2 sons. Sarah died in 1879. Both sons died within 4 years of her, one of fever and one in a fall from a horse. By 1888, Josiah Pratt owned 1,100 acres, 400 head of cattle, a large empty house, and a grief so complete that the ranch hand said he spoke maybe 10 words a day. He was not lonely for a servant. He had hired help. He was lonely the way a man is lonely when every person who ever knew him is in the ground, and the house he built to be full is silent, and he is old, and he understands that he is going to die without anyone holding his hand. He answered the matrimonial paper because his foreman's wife pushed him into it. He wrote the first letter expecting nothing. Then Elanor wrote back, and her letters were sharp and funny and unsentimental. And for the first time in 9 years, Josiah Pratt looked forward to something. The photograph was the mistake. When Elanor asked for one, he panicked. The only photograph he owned of himself was a portrait taken in 1868, when he was 41 and Sarah was alive, and the boys were small. He did not own a recent one. Cameras did not come to a working ranch, and he had no reason to sit for a portrait of an old man alone. He told himself he would explain it when she arrived. He told himself the letters were the true thing and the photograph was just paper. He told himself a great many things, the way a frightened person does, and he sent the old photograph because the alternative was admitting he was an old man, and he was terrified that an old man was exactly what no woman would cross the country for. He was not vain. He was scared. There is a difference, and it matters here. In the weeks before Eleanor's train arrived, Josiah Pratt could not sleep. He knew what he had done. He knew that a woman would step off that train expecting the man in the picture and find a man with a cane. He rehearsed his apology in the barn out loud to the horses because there was no one else to say it to. On the morning Eleanor's train was due, he put on his good coat. He drove the wagon to the depot 2 hours early. He sat on a bench and watched the empty tracks and decided that he would not make excuses. He would apologize, give her money for the return ticket, and let her go home because she deserved the truth even if the truth cost him the one good thing that had happened to him in 9 years. That is the man who took off his hat on the platform. Now you understand both of them. So let me start the clock again. The train hissed behind her. A conductor called the first warning. 4 minutes, maybe 5. Josiah Pratt held his hat against his chest and said the thing he had rehearsed in the barn. Miss Shaw, the photograph I sent you was taken 20 years ago. I am not that man. I am an old man, and I knew it when I sent it, and I let you cross the whole country believing a lie because I was afraid the truth would keep you home. There is no excuse for it. I have money here for your return, ticket and a little besides, for the trouble I caused you. You owe me nothing. I am sorry." He held out an envelope. His hand shook. Elanor did not take it. She looked at him for a long moment. She was a bookkeeper. She had spent her life reading the true story underneath the numbers people presented to her, and she was very good at it. She looked at this old man, at his shaking hand and his wet eyes and the apology he had clearly practiced, and she ran the figures, the way she ran everything. Here is what she saw: a man who had deceived her. That was a debit and a real one, but also a man who, given the chance to lie a second time, to bluster, to charm, to talk her into it, had instead told the whole truth before she said word and had brought her the means to leave him. A man who valued her freedom over his own loneliness. She thought about the men in Dayton, the handsome ones, the young ones, the ones who had looked at a 34-year-old woman with no dowry and decided she was not worth the bother. None of them had ever told her the truth about anything. None of them had ever once put her interests above their own. The conductor called the final warning. Elanor Shaw made her decision the way she made all her decisions, by deciding what kind of person she actually wanted to spend her life beside. Not the face in the photograph, the character on the platform. She said, "Mr. Pratt, the letters. Did you write them yourself, or did your foreman's wife write those too?" Josiah blinked. "I wrote every word. Sat up half the nights doing it. The letter about the calf that wouldn't take to its mother. The one you sat up with in the kitchen. That was true? Every word. The one about missing the sound of someone else breathing in the house." Josiah looked at the ground. "That one most of all." Elanor nodded. She had her answer. The photograph was 20 years old, and it was a lie. The letters were current, and they were true, and she had not fallen in love with a jaw and a head of dark hair. She had fallen in love with a man who sat up nights worrying about a calf in the silence, in an empty house. The train began to move behind her. She did not turn around to watch it go. She said, "Put your money away, Mr. Pratt, and put your hat back on. The wind out here will take the top of your head off, and I did not come 2,000 miles to bury a husband in the first week." It took him a moment to understand. When he did, the old man's face came apart, and he had to look away, and Elanor pretended to study her gloves to give him the privacy of it. They were married 3 days later by a circuit preacher in the front room of the ranch house. There was no celebration. The foreman and his wife stood as witnesses. Elanor wore her traveling dress because it was the best thing she owned. The marriage did not begin as a romance. It began as a partnership between two practical people who had each gambled on a stranger. Elanor took the back bedroom. Josiah did not ask for anything she did not offer. He had buried one wife he loved, and he understood that a second love, if it came at all, would have to be earned slowly and would arrive on its own schedule. What he had not expected was how quickly the house changed. Elanor was a bookkeeper, and the ranch's accounts were a disaster. Josiah was a fine cattleman and a poor record keeper, and grief had made him worse. Within a month, Elanor had found 4 years of unpaid debts owed to him, money he had simply forgotten to collect. She rode to Cheyenne, presented the figures, and came home with more cash than the ranch had seen since the boys died. Josiah watched this small, sharp woman reorganize his entire financial life